All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're unpacking a huge story, a story about a divine promise that took centuries to unfold. And then, bam, it all came together in one single world changing event, the coming of the Holy Spirit. And really, it's a story about what it means to be filled.
So let's start with a question for you. Just imagine for a second that your heart, your mind, that inner part of you is like a balloon. An empty balloon doesn't really do anything, right? It needs to be filled to have a purpose. So the question is, what would fill yours?
The thing is, our minds don't just stay empty. It's like nature abhors a vacuum. If we don't choose what fills that space, something else will. Stuff like greed, anger, envy, or, let's be real, even just the endless, mindless scroll of social media can rush right in. But on the flip side, there's this totally different option, the Holy Spirit. And this contrast, this choice, well, that's the big idea we're digging into. This right here, this is the moment. It's from the book of Acts in the Bible, and it's the key scene. But I want you to notice that specific phrase, filled with the Holy Spirit. That's not a small thing. It's active. It's total. And what's really wild is that this one verse is actually the payoff to a story that was centuries in the making. So here's the core principle, and it's pretty simple when you think about it. Whatever we let fill our inner world is what's going to shape our outer world. Make sense, right? If your mind is full of angry thoughts, angry words tend to come out. If it's filled with kindness, then kindness comes out. What fills you, ultimately, is what defines you. Now, like I said, this moment didn't just pop up out of nowhere. This idea of God dwelling with people was a promise, a hope that had been passed down for hundreds, even thousands of years. Just look at this timeline for a second. You've got these ancient figures, King David, Isaiah, Jeremiah, all talking about these incredible promises, an eternal kingdom, a new covenant written right on our hearts, and then a long, long wait. Think about it, almost 500 years of relative silence passed before Jesus shows up saying, hey, I'm the one these promises are about. And then he adds one more promise of his own, that he'd send a counselor to his followers. So who exactly is this Holy Spirit? Well, according to Christian teaching, the Spirit isn't some new force. It's described as a co-eternal part of the Trinity, right alongside God the Father and Jesus the Son. The source material points all the way back to the very beginning, the second verse of the Bible, where the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters at creation. So not new at all. The scriptures give the Spirit a few different titles, almost like job descriptions, to help us get what it's all about. It's called the Spirit of God and the Spirit of Christ, which really highlights that unity. But then you have the Counselor, which is someone who comes alongside you to help and advise, and the Spirit of Truth, a guide that kind of lights up the path and helps you understand things. Okay, let's get back to the story itself. So Jesus has made this final promise, and then he's gone. And for his followers, this was not a party. This was a time of pure fear. And you can totally see why, right? Their leader, their friend, had just been publicly and brutally executed. The most logical thought in the world for them was, we're next. The source describes them as being absolutely terrified, thinking if they killed Jesus, they are for sure going to kill us too. Their instinct should have been to run, scatter, and hide. But, and this is incredible, they did the complete opposite. Instead of scattering, they gathered. They got together in a room to pray. Why would they do that? Because their belief in that one final promise, that Jesus would send the Spirit, was stronger than their fear. They chose to let that promise fill their minds instead of letting terror take over. So they waited, together, holding on to that hope. And then, 50 days after the Passover, during this huge Jewish festival called Pentecost, when the city was buzzing with people, the moment finally came. The wait was over. And when the Spirit arrived, it wasn't quiet or subtle, it was dramatic. First, there was this sound, like a crazy rushing wind that just filled the whole house. Then, they saw what looked like individual flames of fire, and one rested on each person. And that right there is a huge shift, because in the past, God's presence was tied to a place, the temple. Now it's personal, resting on each individual. And then, they started speaking in languages they had never, ever learned. Remember, Jerusalem was packed with international visitors for the festival. And when these followers start speaking, the crowd outside is just floored. People from all over Rome, Egypt, Arabia were hearing this message, each one in their own native language. It wasn't just gibberish, it was a miracle of supernatural communication. So why this particular miracle?
Why all the different languages? I mean, God could have done anything, right? Well, the source material shows us that there's a really deep symbolic meaning here, and it connects all the way back to another famous story from the Bible. This is so cool. Think back to the Old Testament story of the Tower of Babel. That was all about human pride trying to build its way up to heaven. And the result was God confusing their language, which scattered everyone across the earth. Well, Pentecost is presented as the exact reverse of that. Here you have human humility, people waiting and praying, and it's met with a divine gift that makes language understood, and it gathers people together. So what's the bottom line? This event was a massive signal. It symbolized that all those old barriers were coming down. The message was no longer just for one nation or one culture. It was now for everyone, everywhere, no matter what language you spoke. Okay, so that's the story, and it's an amazing one. But our source also asks, what does this actually mean for us, right now? How does this idea of being spirit-filled apply to our own lives? How do you go from being an empty balloon to a filled one?
Well, the source breaks it down into a pretty straightforward 3-step process. First, you just acknowledge it. You believe that the Spirit is real, just as it was promised. Second, you receive it. You have to willingly open your heart and accept it. And third, you ask. You continually seek its help and guidance in your day-to-day life, relying on it like that counselor we talked about.
Now, there's one really important condition mentioned. The text explains that before a person can be filled with this divine spirit, their heart first needs to be cleansed. And in this particular worldview, that cleansing happens through faith, specifically faith in the meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection, which is believed to wash away sin and make a person new.
And that brings us right back to where we started, full circle. We began with that image of a balloon, just an empty space waiting to be filled. So after looking at this ancient promise and its incredible fulfillment, the final question is really the same as the first, but maybe now it has a bit more weight. What will you choose to fill the space within you?